Madam President, I rise on the floor today to honor the legacy of one of the country's most cherished heroes and a very dear and close friend of mine, John Lewis. This past Saturday marked 1 year since we said goodbye to Congressman Lewis. The pain of his loss is still very fresh for both my wife Marcelle and me, as it is for millions of Americans. He wasn't just a moral giant and a guiding light for the world. He was, as he always told me, my brother. And I still have such a sense of emotion when I think of the times he introduced me as his brother. For more than 6 decades, John Lewis served the United States with an unyielding belief that we could be better, that we have a responsibility to each other and the world to live up to our founding ideals. John didn't spend his life fighting for Democrats or Republicans. He fought for the rights of all Americans and the dignity of all human beings. John's principles were so much bigger than party and politics. When he saw suffering, he tried to end it. Whenever he saw injustice, he tried to correct it. And wherever good trouble was needed, he delivered it. And I knew John as more than just a generational leader. I knew him as a friend. And I can tell you that his dedication to justice was matched only by his fundamental decency as a person. John and I served in Congress for more than 30 years. In those years, I witnessed the tremendous humility and empathy that defined his lifetime of public service. Every day, John embodied the ideals he fought for through his unfailing generosity and dignity. So I consider John Lewis a brother. And it was an honor of a lifetime to have him consider me one too. I think when we walked down the street in Vermont, I just felt suddenly so much a person because I was walking beside John Lewis. But people have seen where he's walked. Many Americans know the stories of John's bravery and the face brutality. He was beaten, bloody, his bones broken in the heroic efforts to bolster the ballot box for millions of Americans. John wasn't just on the front lines of our nation's great civil rights movement, he was the front line. John was there when the Freedom Riders were dragged off their buses and beaten and arrested. John was there to lead the march for freedom from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. And John was there when millions of Americans gathered in Washington to proclaim to the country that the time for justice and equality was now. John Lewis put his body and soul on the line for the mighty movement that changed the world. What fewer Americans may know is that John was beloved and respected by members of both parties. It's because he believed in his heart that our nation's greatest challenges must be faced together, regardless of parties. Where he stood, there beside Lyndon Johnson as he signed the landmark Voting Rights Act of 1965, he was flanked by Democrats and Republicans. In that moment, he absorbed the lessons that reaching across the aisle wasn't just a political necessity. It's the way that you change, everlastingly change society. And throughout his career in Congress, John embraced bipartisanship. He built friendships with members of both parties. For years, John led bipartisan groups of members of Congress, including some of my Republican friends in this body, down to the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama. He wanted to commemorate Bloody Sunday, the American struggle for equal rights. I'll never forget the iconic photo of John. He's flanked on either side by Presidents Obama and George W. Bush. The three of them, heads bowed in silent reflection, arms and hands linked on the Edmund Pettus Bridge for Bloody Sunday's 50th anniversary. John Lewis didn't just cross bridges, he built bridges. And by bringing people together, he helped us forge a more perfect union. So it's in John's spirit today that I fervently urge my Republican friends to join me in restoring and reauthorizing the Voting Rights Act. I'd remind everyone in this body that reauthorizing the VRA, the Voting Rights Act, on a bipartisan basis, that's the way we've always done it. And I say always done it. The core provisions of the VRA have been reauthorized 5 times, and every single time with bipartisan, overwhelming bipartisan support in Congress. And look at the presidents who signed it. President Nixon, President Reagan, George W. Bush, they all signed the Voting Rights Act reauthorizations into law because they spoke of the profound importance of the landmark law for our democracy. I was here in 2006, the most recent VRA reauthorization. And Mr. President, you know what the vote was in this body in 2006? 98-0 in the Senate. In fact, many of the Republican senators still serving today voted yes. 98-0. You can't do much better than that. So let's honor John Lewis's legacy the way he'd want to be honored, with solid, justified action. I'm committed to working with my Republican friends to find a bipartisan compromise around my John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. I proudly renamed it in his honor last Congress. For those who knew John Lewis, and for those who did not, I could say John would want us to come together and find a path forward to addressing the many threats facing Americans' foundational right to vote. I'll tell you what he wouldn't accept. He wouldn't accept inaction. So let's put in the hard work. Let's try to live up to the memory of John Lewis, our hero and our colleague. Let's remember the person who took me by the arm and walked me on to the floor of the other body one day and said, "Everybody, I'm here with my brother." Every one of us felt John was our brother, and we were proud of that. Let's be proud of our brother. Let's be proud of his memory. Let's be proud of America. Let's be proud of the right to vote. Let's pass the John Lewis, reauthorize the John Lewis Voting Rights Act.